With a title like F.E.A.R., a game's gotta be scary, right? F.E.A.R., or First Encounter Assault Recon, is a horror-based first-person shooter that prides itself on its psychological horror atmosphere. When the topic of horror shooters comes up, most people can name F.E.A.R. as an important game in the genre, and even have fond memories of playing it. I played it on PC back when it came out, and I can remember being terrified, yet still loving it. So today, we're gonna turn off the lights and see how well F.E.A.R. holds up. F.E.A.R. was developed by Monolith Productions, a company known in the early 2000s for developing some pretty notable first-person shooters. The No One Lives Forever series, Alien vs. Predator 2, and Tron 2.0 were all well received, so when Vivendi announced they were working with Monolith on a new project, people were excited. While the idea for F.E.A.R. had been around since the release of 1998's Shogo Mobile Armor Division, development began in 2002 right after the release of No One Lives Forever 2. They wanted to create a new engine for the game instead of licensing it like they had done in the past. Lead designer Craig Hubbard said, quote, "This allows us to base engineering decisions on what we're trying to accomplish from a design perspective, instead of basing design decisions on what our game technology is capable of doing." It used a newly modified version of their Lilith engine titled Jupiter EX. Notable advancements include a new physics engine, as well as new lighting and texture mapping systems. This aimed to give the game a more realistic feel. First unveiled at E3 2004 with a 13-minute trailer, F.E.A.R. marks the first game by Monolith with a truly mature tone. The trailer features not only loads of shooting and gore, but also features a character exclaiming,
"I hear you're a bad motherfucker."
This demo showcases a lot of enemies that would make it into the final game, with some notable differences including on-screen waypoints and a more direct cinematic approach to the game's horror elements. Monolith's director of technology Kevin Stevens said that while the game had its supernatural elements, the main focus was the action, and the goal was to capture the feel of an action movie. As for the horror elements, he stated that the team was influenced by The Ring, The Grudge, The Eye, and Dark Waters. In addition to a demo in 2005, the first 4 levels were playable for journalists, garnering some significant positive reactions. Both IGN and GameSpot were excited for the game, with GameSpot saying that the combat was some of the best they had ever seen. Leading up to the 2005 release date, there was a ton of unique marketing done for the game. There was a comic book by Dark Horse Entertainment, a series of live-action shorts, and a machinima series by Red vs. Blue creator Rooster Teeth titled Panics. F.E.A.R. was released in October of 2005, with ports for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 coming in the years to follow. All versions got large amounts of positive praise. However, the PS3 version is the weakest, with critics citing longer loading times and graphical downgrades. The New York Times even called this game more fulfilling than 2005's Shadow of the Colossus, which is absolutely insane. F.E.A.R. received 2 expansion packs, Extraction Point in 2006 and Perseus Mandate in 2007. While Extraction Point received average reviews, Perseus Mandate got a far more negative reaction. Critics stated that the expansions really didn't add much more to the experience, and that the graphics and the gameplay were identical to the original game. Both expansions made their way to the Xbox 360 version, but were strangely absent from the PS3 version. F.E.A.R. 2 Project Origin picks up right where the original game left off, removing the 2 expansions from the series' official canon. Released in 2009, Monolith held a competition to name the game with fans being able to vote on the most popular entries. The finalists included Dead Echo, Project Origin, and Dark Signal. After a F.E.A.R. 2 expansion, F.E.A.R. 3 was announced with Day One Studios developing instead of Monolith. Day One had previously worked on the console ports of F.E.A.R., in addition to a few MechAssault games on the original Xbox. Being the last major entry in the series, the game featured a larger focus on multiplayer and co-op gameplay. Released in 2011, it received positive reviews, but did not sell enough for Warner Bros. To continue the series. The last thing we saw from F.E.A.R. was 2014's F.E.A.R. Online. Developed by In-Play Interactive, it was multiplayer focused, featuring co-op PvE and PvP. The game did not receive much attention, and was very different from the earlier entries in the series. It was released in October of 2004, but was shut down just 7 months later due to the lack of support. The story in F.E.A.R. is not exactly one of its strong points. While it does its job at moving the game forward, it's not exactly one of the most engaging or memorable stories that we've seen in a shooter. We are a character named the Point Man, an operative working for an organization called F.E.A.R. As it stated during the game's intro, F.E.A.R.s is a secret organization formed by the government in 2002 to take care of paranormal threats to national security. We as the point man have superhuman reflexes which allow us to go into a bullet time effect, similar to the Matrix or Max Payne. This gameplay element is one of the things that sets this game apart from its peers, but I'll get to that more later. The game features two main antagonists, the first of which being Paxton Fettel. F.E.A.R. begins with Fettel taking control of a telepathically controlled super soldier army, which he used to take control of the Armacham Technology Corporation headquarters. Armacham Technology is not only responsible for the clone army, but also the game's other antagonist, Alma Wade. F.E.A.R. is tasked with taking down Fettel, and trying to eliminate him will be what most of the game is centered around. As we fight through corridors and slightly more open areas filled with enemies, we'll experience some unexplained hallucinations. These will mostly boil down to seeing Alma Wade, a little girl who was jacked straight out of the ring. You can die during some of these, but for the most part, they serve no purpose other than to try and scare or confuse you. Mostly the second one. They can be a little distracting sometimes when you just want to get back to the action, but towards the end it combines with the gameplay for some extremely annoying ghost fighting segments. As we progress, we find out that Fettel was trained to be a telepathic military leader through a secret government experiment titled Project Origin. He is one of Alma Wade's sons, who was an extremely powerful psychic. At the age of 10, Fettel was telepathically connected with Alma, which leads F.E.A.R. to believe he is under her control. We track Fettel to the Origin facility where Alma was locked up due to her immense power. This is where we get the game's twist. We are Alma Wade's other son. During this hallucination, we are finally able to kill Paxton Fettel. Just when you think things can't get any crazier, Alma is freed by the leader of Project Origin, Harlan Wade, who is revealed to be her father, and therefore your grandfather. We then try to destroy the entire facility by sabotaging the building's reactor, hoping to kill Alma once and for all. After a really annoying ghost fighting section that I mentioned earlier, we finish the game, escaping the destruction of the facility with our team in a helicopter. Just when you think there's going to be a happy ending, you get to see Alma one last time, setting up the sequels. In a post-credits scene, we get to hear a phone call where the Armacham Technology president states that the Origin situation is under control, and that the first prototype was a success. This is referring to us, the point man. As I mentioned earlier, this story's not very good or memorable. While it may seem interesting when I explain it in a short period of time like this, over the course of this bloated experience, the story has absolutely no stakes. The game can be completed in roughly 8 to 10 hours, but it feels so much longer than that. It's not scary, it's not creepy, and it's not interesting. Sure, there are a few jump scares, but unless just the sight of a little girl or minor bits of gore scare you, you'll be just fine. Most of the game's characters are one note, and while the main antagonists are somewhat interesting, it takes away from them knowing that they return for F.E.A.R. 2 and F.E.A.R. 3. However, I did like this asshole who showed up from time to time for some comic relief.
What am I, an IS lackey? Tell you what, you disable the local security system, and I'll see what I can do about the server.
My main problem with this story is that if someone asked me what this game was about, I couldn't tell them, and I just wrote the script. The graphics surprisingly hold up more than shooters from this time. The game has a specific dark color palette that it never strays from, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But when combined with the fact that most of the game's environments look very similar, if not identical, it will leave a lot to be desired in the environmental variety department. The quote-unquote horror hallucination sections look very good at first, but over time lose their charm when you realize they don't really mean much. I do think that the lighting in this game is done quite well though. It looks great every time you enter a dimly lit room, and it helps to add to the horror element that the game tried to go for. F.E.A.R. doesn't feature much music, but the sound design is quite impressive. You'll hear atmospheric ambient tracks that feel straight out of a horror movie. This can help to make certain sections feel much more tense than others. While most of the game's voiceover is passable at best, none of it stands out. Characters sound pretty much exactly how you think they will, with none of the VO being outright cringy or bad. I will say that I never got tired of hearing holy shit in slow motion. When it comes to gameplay, there's not too much to separate F.E.A.R. from a standard FPS. It's extremely linear, and all you'll be doing is making your way forward by any means necessary. Sometimes this may be a light puzzle or something similar, but in most cases you'll just be traveling from room to room killing clone soldiers. A typical scenario throughout this game consists of the following. Get to a new area and hear some chatter from the clone soldiers. Either stealth up and kill a few, or go in guns blazing. and then continue on to the next one. There are other sections where you'll be investigating an area, or just moving through somewhere with an extended period of no combat. But for the most part, this game is just a bunch of combat scenarios that never feel special. The shooting and movement in F.E.A.R. feel great, and part of this comes from the bullet time mechanic. You can activate this at any time, and it really leads to some unique scenarios. I enjoyed every single time I threw a grenade, smacked an enemy with a gun, or even just plain shot them in slow motion. It truly never gets old, and without it, we wouldn't even be talking about this game right now. The guns are your pretty standard affair. Pistols, assault rifles, and shotguns, but there are a few unique additions. The particle weapon and the nail gun are by far the most fun guns to use. The particle weapon vaporizes the enemies into skeletons, while the nail gun can pin enemies to just about anything. I found myself using the nail gun more often because it was not only powerful, but it created hilarious moments almost every time I used it. The normal guns all do feel pretty good, but the shotgun is another standout amongst these. You can also melee enemies with your weapon, which often results in an instant kill. When you activate bullet time and just go in guns blazing, this game feels like none other. I just wish they had capitalized on this more, instead of what felt like the same scenarios over and over again. For something billed as a horror game, F.E.A.R. is very fast. And this makes sense, because if it was as slow as something like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, the bullet time wouldn't make much sense. But this sense of speed really takes away from most of the tension. As I mentioned earlier, the horror almost never hits, and can even feel lame at points. The game is also not particularly hard, even on higher difficulties. We never had an issue with medkits, as there is no regenerating health above 25%. And even if I died, it was just because I was playing recklessly and not thinking too much about it. The last thing I want to mention is the game's AI. When F.E.A.R. was released, the AI was a big selling point, stating that it was highly advanced, taking cover, flanking you, and other cool things. It even won the award for Best AI from GameSpot in 2005. This is one of those things that can be a little hard to judge, as advancements in this field make us so used to what we see in modern games. While I commend the game for its advanced AI, it really doesn't make a difference in the end. F.E.A.R. could have been something really special, but instead what we have here is a very generic first-person shooter with a few unique elements. The horror never truly hits, and it feels like a very missed opportunity. What ends up happening is, you'll see the HUD flashing and think, oh, there's a horror part coming, and because you know that right after that part you'll just go back to fighting wave after wave of enemies, there's no stress or tension. And I would have no problem with that if the game wasn't trying to be something it's not. F.E.A.R. is a bad horror game and an average first-person shooter. The shooter gameplay holds up and actually feels great. Movement, bullet time, and the shooting all feel smooth throughout the entire experience, but that's not enough to save it. I just can't bring myself to recommend this game. It's bland, and I have no intention of ever going back to it, or its sequels.